I've had a deadly peanut allergy since I was a kid. Everyone in my family knew it, especially my brother. But that night, he still mixed peanuts into my food. The moment I took the first bite, my skin burned, my throat tightened, and everything went dark. When I woke up in the hospital, what I saw changed my life forever. My name is Ava Collins, and I'm 28 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington, in a small apartment that overlooks the quiet side of Lake Union. People often say the view must make me feel peaceful, but I think peace is something you build, not something you're given. For me, peace didn't come from the world outside my window, it came from surviving the one inside my childhood home. I grew up in a house that always looked perfect from the street. Freshly painted walls, flowers along the porch, and neighbors who believed my parents were the kindest people in the world. But what people saw was only the cover of a book that I was forced to read every day, one page at a time, while the story inside hurt more than anyone could imagine. My parents, Robert and Diane Collins, were the kind of couple who smiled in public and fought in private. My father worked as a financial consultant and liked to talk about discipline and family values, while my mother, Diane, loved to host small get-togethers, always careful that the house looked spotless. They looked like the perfect parents, but only one of their children ever got to live inside that illusion, and it wasn't me. When I was 7, my brother Brandon was born, and that was the day the spotlight shifted forever. My mother called him her little miracle, and my father used to say that he finally had a son to carry the name forward. I remember standing near my grandmother Martha, watching them fawn over the tiny bundle in the crib while I stood there clutching the teddy bear Grandma had given me. I wanted to be happy too, but deep down, I knew something had changed. From that day on, everything I did seemed to fade into the background. If Brandon drew a crooked sun, my mother framed it. If I brought home straight A's, she said, "Good, but don't get too proud." My father would take Brandon to baseball practice every weekend, while I sat at home helping my mother with laundry, pretending not to care. It didn't take me long to realize that no matter how hard I tried, I'd never be enough for them. When I was 9, I had my first allergic reaction to peanuts. It was at a school birthday party. A classmate had brought peanut butter cookies. I remember how quickly my throat tightened, how I gasped for air, how the teacher screamed for help. I woke up in the hospital with tubes in my arm and my grandmother holding my hand. My parents arrived hours later, arguing about whose fault it was that I'd eaten something I shouldn't have. Even then, my mother managed to say, "She always makes everything dramatic." My allergy was severe. It could kill me within minutes, but to them, it was just another inconvenience, another reason to roll their eyes. Only Grandma Martha understood what it really meant. From that day on, she made sure there were labels on everything I ate when I visited her, and she'd always tell me, "You have to protect yourself, sweetheart, because sometimes the people who should protect you won't." I didn't understand her words then, but they became my truth. Brandon grew older, and so did the imbalance in our home. My parents spoiled him with gifts, new bikes, gaming consoles, weekend trips, while I learned to find comfort in books and solitude. When I turned 13 and got first place in my science fair, my father didn't even show up. That same night, he took Brandon out for ice cream because he'd been feeling left out lately. I remember sitting on the porch with Grandma that evening. She looked at me over her knitting needles and said softly, "You're growing into a remarkable young woman, Ava. They just don't see it yet." But I think she knew they never would. High school was when I started to notice how deep the cracks really went. Every decision at home revolved around Brandon. His school, his friends, his comfort. I got used to hearing sentences like, "We can't afford that right now, Ava, maybe next year," followed immediately by, "We're buying Brandon a new computer for his studies." I worked twice as hard for half the recognition, but Grandma never let me feel invisible. She was my constant, a quiet, steady light in a house full of shadows. I used to spend weekends at her little blue house at the edge of town, where she'd make cinnamon pancakes and listen to me talk for hours. She believed in my dreams when no one else cared. One day she'd say, "You'll fly so high that they'll have to look up to see you." I clung to those words like they were a promise. My allergy didn't make things easier. Brandon thought it was funny to tease me about it. He'd wave peanut candy in front of my face and laugh when I panicked. Once when I told my mother, she sighed and said, "Oh Ava, stop being so sensitive. He's just joking. But allergies aren't jokes, and neither is the feeling of being dismissed every time you cry for help. Those small moments built up over the years, layer upon layer, until even silence started to feel heavy. By the time I turned 16, I had learned to survive without expecting kindness. My parents' approval stopped mattering, their affection stopped hurting, and their words stopped sinking in. I focused on my studies, my grades, and my goal: to leave that house the first chance I got. Grandma Martha kept reminding me that the world outside was bigger and brighter than the one I'd grown up in. Your strength will scare them one day, she told me. I didn't know what she meant then, but her words became my compass. Looking back now, I think my childhood taught me the most painful and valuable lesson of my life. Love without respect is just control disguised as care. I spent years thinking something was wrong with me, but the truth was, I was growing in a garden that was never watered. And yet somehow, against all odds, I bloomed. I still remember the day the letter came. It was springtime, and the cherry blossoms were scattering across the front yard like pink snow. I'd been waiting for weeks, praying that all the late nights and endless studying would finally mean something. When I tore open the envelope and saw the words "Congratulations, you've been awarded a full scholarship," I felt like the air had changed. I ran downstairs, heart racing, holding that letter as if it were made of gold. For a moment, I believed this was it. This was the day my parents would finally look at me with pride. My mother, Diane, was sitting at the kitchen counter scrolling through her tablet, while my father, Robert, read the newspaper. "Mom, Dad," I said, trying to steady my voice, "I got the scholarship. A full ride to Ridgeway University." My mother looked up, expression blank for a second, then smiled faintly. "That's nice, Ava. But did you talk to your brother this morning? He's been feeling a little down about not making the basketball team." My father didn't even lower his paper. He muttered, "That's good, honey. Hard work pays off." And that was it. No hug, no celebration, no acknowledgement that I had earned something on my own. I stood there frozen, holding that letter like an idiot, realizing once again that their pride had a price tag, and I was never expensive enough to buy it. I went back upstairs, locked my door, and cried quietly into my pillow until I heard the sound of Brandon laughing downstairs. He'd just received a new gaming console for being such a good kid lately. The timing almost made me laugh. It was the same day I achieved something life-changing, but in our house, his happiness always came first. That night, I sat at Grandma Martha's house, the letter spread out on the coffee table. She read it twice, then looked up at me with teary eyes. "I knew you'd do it," she said softly, her voice trembling with pride. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." Those were the words I'd been dying to hear all my life, and they came from the only person who had never stopped believing in me. "But," I said quietly, "I'll need help with housing. The scholarship covers tuition, but I'll need a place to stay." Grandma hesitated. "Have you talked to your parents?" I nodded. "They said they're saving money for Brandon's college fund." The disappointment on her face wasn't surprise, it was sadness. "Of course they did," she whispered, shaking her head. "You listen to me, Ava. If they won't help you, you'll stay here. This house is yours as much as it's mine." So that's what I did. I packed my things and moved into Grandma's spare room. The walls smelled faintly of lavender, and for the first time in my life, I felt safe. I took a part-time job at a local bookstore to cover my living expenses, balancing shifts with classes and long commutes. It wasn't easy. Some nights I'd come home exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open, but Grandma was always waiting for me with a cup of tea and her quiet smile. "You remind me of myself at your age," she'd say. "Except braver." Every time she said that, the exhaustion melted a little. She never treated me like a burden, never made me feel guilty for dreaming big. The more time I spent away from my parents, the clearer things became. It wasn't that I wasn't lovable, it was that they didn't know how to love without control. They were so obsessed with Brandon's success that they couldn't see mine as anything but competition. When I called home to check in, conversations were brief. My mother always started with, "Your brother just," and ended with, "Anyway, we're proud of you too, I guess." My father would remind me to stay humble every single time. It was as if they were allergic to showing genuine affection. I learned to stop expecting warmth from them. I poured every ounce of that need into my work, my goals, and my bond with Grandma. University life changed me. Ridgeway University wasn't glamorous. It was demanding, relentless, and competitive. But it became the first place where I was seen. My professors noticed my effort, my classmates respected me, and I finally started to see myself as someone worth believing in. I still remember the first time Ms. Rebecca Moore, my marketing professor, told me, "You have a natural instinct for strategy, Ava. Don't ever let anyone dim that." I wrote her words down in my notebook and kept them taped above my desk. I didn't know it then, but she would later become one of the most important figures in my life. Still, there were nights when the loneliness crept in. Whenever I scrolled through social media and saw photos of Brandon's birthday parties, lavish, full of laughter and smiles, I felt a quiet ache. They never invited me, never even texted me. Sometimes Grandma would mention them gently, but I'd shrug it off. "It's fine," I'd say. "I'm used to it." But inside, it hurt like an old wound that never really healed. I worked through it by focusing on what I could control: my education, my independence, my future. Every small success felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that my parents had tried to erase. By the time I graduated, I had a job offer waiting for me from a marketing firm in downtown Seattle. I remember walking across the stage in my cap and gown, searching the crowd for Grandma's face. She was there, standing in the front row, clapping with tears streaming down her cheeks. My parents hadn't come. I'd sent them the invitation out of obligation, not hope. When I realized they weren't there, I didn't feel disappointed, I felt free. It was as if I had finally accepted that their absence was my closure. That night, Grandma and I went out to dinner at a small Italian restaurant. She raised her glass and said, "To new beginnings." I smiled, clinking my glass against hers. "To us," I replied. For the first time, it felt like enough. Years later, when I think back to that moment, I realize it was the turning point of my entire life. That scholarship wasn't just my escape, it was my rebirth. It was proof that I didn't need their validation to exist. I could build my own future, even if I had to do it from scratch. My parents once told me I couldn't survive without their help. What they didn't know was that their rejection became the very thing that made me unstoppable. 5 years after graduation, I had built the kind of life I used to dream about while lying awake in Grandma's spare bedroom. I worked as a marketing strategist at a mid-sized firm in downtown Seattle, a company known for its fast-paced environment and impossible deadlines. Most days began before sunrise and ended long after the city lights flickered on, but I loved it. The constant pressure, the endless campaigns, the meetings that stretched into the evening, it all reminded me that I had earned every inch of this life. I rented a modest apartment on the 12th floor of a building overlooking the bay. On quiet nights, I'd sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watching ferries drift across the dark water, and think I made it. The company had recently promoted me to lead strategist after I helped secure one of our biggest clients. When Ms. Rebecca Moore, my boss, handed me the official letter, she said, "You've done exceptional work, Ava. You don't just think outside the box, you redesign it." Those words meant everything to me. She wasn't like my parents. When she said she was proud of me, I believed her. That weekend, I decided to post a picture on social media, a simple photo of me holding my promotion letter with the Seattle skyline behind me. The caption read, "Hard work, late nights and faith, it finally paid off." I didn't expect much from it. Maybe a few likes from colleagues or old classmates. But within hours, the post blew up. Old professors commented. Former classmates congratulated me. Even people I barely knew from high school wrote messages like, "You were always meant for big things." It felt good, but not in an arrogant way. It felt like validation for all the years I had stayed silent while others doubted me. Grandma called me that evening, her voice trembling with joy. "I saw your photo, sweetheart. I showed it to everyone at church. They couldn't believe how grown up you've become." I laughed through tears, picturing her proudly showing my photo to strangers. "You're my brightest star," she said, and my heart felt full. But that feeling didn't last long. The very next day, my phone rang while I was reviewing a campaign proposal. The screen flashed an unfamiliar number, but something about it made my stomach twist. When I answered, a voice I hadn't heard in years said, "Ava." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Mom." I whispered. There was a pause, then Diane's voice softened in that practiced way of hers. "Yes, sweetheart. It's been so long. How are you?" Her tone was syrupy sweet, but beneath it, I could hear the calculation, the same tone she used when she wanted something. "I'm fine," I said carefully. "What's going on?" She sighed. "We saw your post. Your father and I are so proud of you. Brandon showed it to us. We were just talking about how much we miss you." It was strange hearing those words after years of silence. They didn't sound real, but a small, foolish part of me wanted to believe them. "You miss me?" I repeated quietly. "Of course," she said quickly. "You've been working so hard. Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? We'd love to celebrate your success as a family." The phrase "as a family" hit me like a whisper from the past, a place I didn't belong to anymore. Still, I hesitated. Grandma had always told me that forgiveness could heal, but forgetting could destroy. I thanked my mother for calling and told her I'd think about it. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. That night, I drove to Grandma's house. She was sitting in her recliner, knitting a pale blue scarf. I sat beside her and told her about the call. Her needles paused mid-air. "Diane called?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. I nodded. "She wants me to come home for dinner." Grandma's eyes narrowed. "And what did you say?" I said I'd think about it. She sighed, setting her knitting aside. "Ava, I know you have a kind heart. You always have. But be careful. People don't change just because you've succeeded, they change when they lose their grip on you." I looked down at my hands. Maybe they just want to make things right. Grandma reached out and held my hand. "Then let them prove it without pulling you back into their world." For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Part of me wanted closure, some small acknowledgement that maybe they finally saw me as more than an afterthought. Another part of me remembered every cruel word, every dismissal, every time they made me feel invisible. On Friday, I was in the middle of a meeting when another message from my mother popped up on my phone. "Dinner is at 6. Your father can't wait to see you. Brandon's so excited too. Please don't disappoint us again." That last sentence was like a knife. Please don't disappoint us again. Even now, after everything, she still found a way to make it sound like my absence was the problem. I showed the text to Ms. Moore after the meeting, almost laughing. "They haven't spoken to me in years," I said, "and now they want a family dinner." She smiled gently. "Success has a way of making people remember you," she said. "The question is, do you owe them your time?" That night, I stood by my apartment window again, watching the reflection of the city lights in the glass. The view looked different now, less peaceful, more uncertain. I thought about Grandma's warning, about Ms. Moore's advice, and about the lonely girl I used to be who would have given anything for her parents' approval. I wasn't that girl anymore, but a part of her still lived inside me, whispering that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment I'd finally be accepted. Against my better judgment, I texted my mother back, "Okay. I'll come for dinner." Within minutes, she replied with a flurry of heart emojis and exclamation marks. It almost made me laugh. The next morning, Grandma called. She didn't ask what I'd decided, she already knew. "You're going, aren't you?" she said softly. "Yes," I admitted. "Just to see if things are different." There was silence on the line before she said, "Promise me one thing, Ava. Promise me you'll trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, leave." I promised, but part of me didn't believe I'd need to. As the weekend approached, I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to the dinner ahead. I pictured my parents smiling across the table, maybe Brandon apologizing, maybe a chance to rebuild what was broken. But deep down, a small voice whispered the truth I didn't want to hear. People who never valued you rarely start out of love, they start out of need. And I had no idea how much I was about to lose by walking through that front door again. Saturday evening arrived faster than I expected, and by the time I realized it, The sun was already melting behind the skyline, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. I stood in front of my closet longer than I should have, debating what to wear. It wasn't about fashion, it was about armor. Part of me wanted to show them that I had built a life without their help, that I was no longer the girl they used to overlook. But another part of me, quieter and more fragile, didn't want to seem like I was trying too hard. In the end, I chose a simple navy dress and a soft gray coat. Professional, understated, untouchable. As I looked in the mirror, I whispered, "You're just going for dinner. Nothing more." But the tremor in my voice betrayed me. The drive to my parents' house felt like driving into a memory I wasn't sure I wanted to remember. The roads looked the same, but they felt heavier somehow. Every turn reminded me of teenage nights spent staring out the car window while my parents praised Brandon for achievements he hadn't even earned. As I pulled into their street, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. The house looked almost exactly as it had years ago, the same cream-painted walls, the same manicured lawn, the same wind chime by the porch that used to lull me to sleep when I stayed awake crying. Only this time, there was a new luxury car parked in the driveway. I didn't need to guess whose it was. Brandon always got what he wanted. I sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave. Grandma's voice echoed in my head, steady and wise. "People don't change because you want them to, Ava." But I had already made the promise. I took a deep breath, grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought as a courtesy gift, and stepped out of the car. The cold air bit against my skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill that spread through me when the front door opened before I even knocked. My mother stood there, her smile perfectly rehearsed. "Ava. Oh my goodness, look at you," she said, her voice dripping with surprise and sweetness. She pulled me into a quick hug, one of those polite gestures that didn't carry warmth. I caught a whiff of her expensive perfume, the same one she wore when she wanted to impress people. "Hi, Mom," I said, forcing a small smile. "You look great." She laughed softly, waving a hand. "Oh, nonsense. You're the one who looks so professional. My successful daughter." The words sounded nice, but there was something rehearsed about them, like lines in a play she didn't believe in. Inside, the house smelled faintly of candles and roasted meat. Everything looked polished, almost too polished, as if the dinner was less about reunion and more about presentation. My father appeared from the living room, holding a glass of whiskey. "Ava," he said curtly, nodding. "You've grown into a fine woman." I wanted to say, "I've been one for a while," but I just smiled politely instead. Brandon walked in next, wearing a smug grin and an expensive watch that gleamed under the chandelier. "Well, look who decided to visit," he said. "The city girl herself." "Good to see you too, Brandon," I replied, my voice steady. He leaned in and hugged me a little too tightly, whispering, "Don't be nervous. Mom's been planning this dinner for days." We moved to the dining room, where the table was set for 4, complete with candles, silverware, and a centerpiece of white lilies, my grandmother's favorite flowers. I tried not to overthink it, but it tugged at something deep inside me. As we sat down, my mother poured wine into each glass, chattering about neighborhood events, new recipes, and her garden. It all felt rehearsed, like small talk designed to delay something real. I kept waiting for the shift, the moment when their real intentions would surface. It didn't take long. "So, Ava," my father said suddenly, swirling his drink, "your mother tells me you've been promoted. That's quite an accomplishment." I nodded. "Yes, I'm grateful. It's been a lot of work." He smiled faintly. "Hard work always pays off. Maybe you can help your brother find that kind of opportunity." I froze. There it was, the real reason. My mother jumped in quickly, her tone too cheerful. "Oh, we were just talking about that. Brandon's been looking for something more stable lately. You work with such important people, sweetheart. Maybe you could talk to your boss about him? He's very smart, you know." I set my glass down slowly. "Mom, that's not how it works," I said carefully. "I can't just give someone a position because they're family." She blinked, feigning confusion. "Oh, come on, it's just a little recommendation. It's not like we're asking for much." "Actually, it is," I said quietly. My father's voice hardened. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Families help each other. And where was that help when I needed housing during college? I asked before I could stop myself. The room fell silent. My mother's expression faltered for a second before she recovered. That's ancient history, Ava. We did what we thought was best. Brandon sighed dramatically. You always make everything about you. His tone made my blood boil. I'm not making it about me, I said. I'm just explaining that I can't, won't, use my job to hand out favors. The tension crackled like static in the air. My mother's cheerful mask began to slip. I just thought you'd be happy to give back to your family, she said tightly. After all, we raised you. I almost laughed at that. Raised me? I wanted to say, Grandma did that. But I bit my tongue. The conversation limped forward after that, each sentence a careful dance around the growing tension. I tried to stay polite, but every word felt heavier than the last. After a while, my mother stood up and announced, "Dinner's ready." She disappeared into the kitchen while Brandon leaned closer and whispered, "You could have just said yes. It's not a big deal." I didn't respond. I just looked at him and wondered when exactly he'd turned into someone who saw manipulation as normal. When the food was served, everything looked perfect: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, salad, and a dish I didn't recognize. "It's a new recipe," my mother said proudly. "You'll love it." I hesitated for a moment but forced a smile. "It looks great." As we started eating, I tried to focus on small talk. My job, the city, the weather, but something about the taste of the sauce lingered oddly on my tongue. I brushed it off, but a flicker of unease crawled up my spine. When dinner ended, my mother stood and hugged me tightly. "We're so proud of you, Ava," she said again. "You've come such a long way." I smiled weakly, the words hollowing out as they reached me. I wanted to believe her, but something about her tone felt rehearsed, too smooth, too perfect. When I finally stepped outside into the cold night, I looked back through the window and saw them laughing together. Brandon leaned toward her, whispering something that made her smile. A strange heaviness settled in my chest. For a moment, I thought maybe I was just imagining things, but deep down I could feel it. Something wasn't right. I didn't know what they were planning, but I could sense it like a storm gathering behind clear skies. The night of the dinner felt unnaturally still, like the city itself was holding its breath. I parked in the same spot as before, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as the porch lights glowed faintly ahead of me. From the outside, everything looked so peaceful that for a moment, I almost convinced myself that I had overreacted. Maybe this was just an ordinary family dinner. Maybe my mother had really meant what she said, that she wanted to reconnect. But then I remembered the way Brandon had smirked the last time I left, and that thought dissolved whatever comfort I had built on the drive here. I took a deep breath, fixed a polite smile on my face, and walked toward the front door with a bottle of white wine I'd picked up on the way. It was the kind my mother liked, at least that's what she used to tell people when she wanted to sound sophisticated. The door opened before I could knock. "Ava!" my mother exclaimed as if she were welcoming a celebrity, her voice high-pitched and forced. "You're right on time." She hugged me briefly, her perfume strong enough to make my head spin. "You look wonderful, dear. Work must be treating you well." I nodded, offering the wine. "I thought you'd enjoy this." "Oh, perfect," she said, already turning toward the kitchen. Inside, the house was brighter than before, every light on, every surface polished to perfection. The smell of roasted chicken and buttery rolls filled the air, and soft jazz played in the background. My father was seated in the living room, flipping through a business magazine. He looked up briefly when I entered, his expression unreadable. "Good to see you again, Ava," he said flatly, setting the magazine down. "How's the city life treating you?" "Busy but good," I replied. "I can't complain." "You never did," he muttered, and though it was said under his breath, it stung. Brandon appeared next, freshly shaved, his hair slicked back in a style that looked expensive but hollow. "There she is," he said with a grin. "Our superstar. Ms. Big City herself." "Hi, Brandon," I said softly. "You look different." He laughed. "You mean better." We gathered around the dining table, and my mother busied herself pouring drinks and straightening silverware that was already perfectly aligned. The table looked like something out of a magazine, candles flickering, crystal glasses gleaming, and a spread of food that could have fed 10 people. "It's so nice to have everyone together," my mother said dreamily. "It's been far too long." "Whose choice was that?" I asked before I could stop myself. The smile on her face froze for a split second before she recovered. "Let's not talk about the past tonight," she said smoothly. "Tonight is about family and celebration." Brandon raised his glass. "To Ava's big promotion," he said. "And to new beginnings." I clinked my glass against his, though I could feel his eyes on me, too sharp to be brotherly. Dinner began with harmless chatter. Mostly my mother bragging about her book club, my father talking about the stock market, and Brandon complaining about how the job market is unfair. I nodded politely, cutting small pieces of chicken, trying to keep my hands steady. But underneath the surface, tension pulsed quietly, like a drumbeat waiting to break into chaos. It didn't take long for my mother to steer the conversation toward what she really wanted. "So, Ava," she began, her tone light but deliberate, "have you thought more about what we discussed last week? About helping Brandon find a position?" I set my fork down slowly. "Mom, I already told you, it's not that simple. I can't just get someone hired because they're family." "Oh, come on, sweetheart," she said, laughing as if I had said something absurd. "It's just a small favor. Your brother's been under so much stress lately." Brandon leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Yeah, sis. I figured you'd at least put in a good word. It's not like I'm asking for charity." I met his gaze calmly. "That's exactly what you're asking for." The air went still. My father's voice broke the silence. "Ava, don't talk to your brother that way. You're acting ungrateful." "Ungrateful?" I repeated, my voice quiet but firm. "For what? For being treated like I don't exist? For getting where I am without a single ounce of help from either of you?" My mother sighed dramatically. "You always make yourself the victim. We've done our best for both of you." "No," I said softly. "You did your best for him." My words seemed to slice through the fragile calm of the room. My father slammed his hand on the table. "Enough," he barked. "We invited you here to have dinner, not to start a fight." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice even. "Then maybe stop turning every conversation into a transaction." My mother's eyes flashed. "You know what your problem is, Ava? You've become arrogant. You think a few years in the city makes you better than your own family." "No," I said. "I just stopped apologizing for being who I am." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the clinking of Brandon's fork against his plate. Then my mother smiled again, a brittle smile. "Let's just enjoy dinner," she said sweetly. "I made your favorite, chicken with honey glaze. And there's a new salad recipe I think you'll love." I hesitated but nodded. My throat felt dry as I reached for my water. The salad looked colorful, greens, fruit, and something crushed sprinkled over the top. I took a small bite, forcing myself to relax. It tasted good, though a little different from what I remembered. "It's delicious," I said automatically. My mother's smile widened. "I knew you'd like it." Brandon let out a quiet laugh that I almost missed, but when I looked at him, his grin didn't reach his eyes. Something twisted in my stomach. The room suddenly felt too warm. We finished dinner, and my mother began clearing plates while humming softly. Brandon leaned back in his chair, watching me. "You okay, Ava?" he asked, his tone light but mocking. "You look a little pale." "I'm fine," I said, though my chest felt tight. My breathing grew shallow, and I pressed a hand against my collarbone. "Just tired, maybe." But the tightening didn't stop, it worsened. My heart raced, my throat began to close, and panic surged through me. I gasped for air, clawing at my neck. "Ava!" my mother cried, but her voice sounded distant, warped. I could hear Brandon muttering something under his breath, something that sounded like it was just supposed to scare her. The edges of my vision blurred. I stumbled back, knocking over my glass, the sound echoing like thunder in my ears. My mother was shouting, my father yelling for an ambulance, but none of it felt real. All I could think of was Grandma's voice, "Trust your instincts, Ava." My last clear thought before everything went dark was that I should have listened. The world tilted, and I collapsed to the floor, the smell of roasted chicken fading as everything dissolved into silence. When I opened my eyes, everything was white, walls, lights, the ceiling above me. My throat burned, my chest ached, and an oxygen mask pressed against my face. Machines beeped steadily beside me. I was alive, but barely. As the fog in my mind began to clear, the first thing I saw was a familiar figure by my bedside, Grandma Martha, her eyes swollen from crying. She took my hand and whispered, "You're safe now, sweetheart. You're going to be okay." I wanted to ask her what had happened, but the words wouldn't come out. All I could do was squeeze her hand weakly. She brushed my hair back and said, "It's over now. We know what they did." And though I was too weak to speak, tears slipped down my face because deep down, I knew she was right. Whatever illusion of family I had left, it died that night with my last breath at their table. The sound of laughter still echoed faintly in my ears when I opened my eyes. For a brief second, I didn't remember where I was. The white ceiling above me seemed to stretch endlessly, humming softly with fluorescent light. Then the beeping beside me pulled me back into reality. A steady, mechanical rhythm. My throat burned as though it had been scraped raw. I tried to speak but couldn't. Something pressed against my face, a mask, soft but firm, feeding me air in gentle bursts. Panic shot through me, and I reached up instinctively, but a familiar hand caught mine. "Easy, sweetheart," a trembling voice whispered. I turned my head slightly and saw her, Grandma Martha. Her eyes were red and swollen, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun. "You're safe now," she murmured. "You're at St. Luke's Hospital. You had a reaction, but they got to you in time." I blinked, struggling to process her words. A reaction. My chest tightened at the memory. Dinner, the salad, the strange taste, the heat rushing through my throat. I remembered the panic, the pain, the sound of my mother's voice fading into a blur. And then nothing. Just darkness. I tried to sit up, but Martha gently pushed me back. "Don't," she said softly. "You need to rest." I looked around, seeing the tubes and machines surrounding me. A clear 4-line dripped into my arm. My voice came out as a rasp. "Grandma, what happened?" She hesitated, glancing toward the door as if to make sure we were alone. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "You should see this," she said quietly. "Barbara sent it to me." She tapped the screen, and a video began to play. My heart pounded as the image appeared. It was the dinner table, my parents' dining room. Someone had been recording from across the room, their phone hidden behind a decorative glass shelf. The angle was shaky but clear enough. It showed Brandon walking toward my plate while my mother spoke to my father in the kitchen. He looked over his shoulder once, then carefully reached into his pocket and sprinkled something over my salad. Crushed peanuts. My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe, not from the allergy this time, but from disbelief. "No," I whispered. No, he wouldn't. But there he was right on the screen, smirking to himself as he sat back down moments before I entered the room. Tears stung my eyes. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. He was just joking, right? He didn't mean to. My grandmother's voice broke as she said, "Ava, look at me." That was no joke. He knew exactly what he was doing. I covered my mouth with trembling hands as the tears spilled down. The pain wasn't just physical anymore. It was deeper, rawer. "They could have killed me," I whispered. "They tried to." My grandmother's eyes glistened as she took my hand again. "Barbara called the police the moment she saw the video. The hospital's already filed a report. The detective in charge, Marcus Gray, said he'll be coming to talk to you when you're ready." The name sounded distant, meaningless through the noise in my head. I couldn't stop seeing Brandon's face, the casual cruelty, the smug confidence. All those years of teasing, the peanut jokes, the way he laughed when I panicked as a child. Had it always been building toward this? I closed my eyes, but the image wouldn't leave. My mind replayed every small moment, Every warning sign I ignored because I wanted to believe family couldn't be that cruel. But I was wrong. They could. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. Grandma sat beside me the whole time, occasionally wiping away tears she tried to hide. At one point, a nurse came in to check my vitals, smiling kindly. "You're lucky," she said softly. "The ambulance got to you just in time. Another few minutes and it might have been too late." Her words made me shiver. Another few minutes. I was that close to dying. Because of them. Because of him. Later that evening, Detective Marcus Gray arrived. He was tall, calm, and spoke in a tone that was both professional and gentle. "Miss Collins," he said, pulling a chair beside my bed. "I know this isn't easy, but I need to ask you a few questions." I nodded, my throat still raw. "Do you remember what happened before the reaction?" I swallowed hard. My mother served dinner. I ate the salad. It tasted a little strange, but I didn't think much of it. Then, it just started. My throat, my chest. I couldn't breathe. He nodded slowly, jotting something down in his notebook. "Did anyone else touch your food before you?" I don't know," I said. "I wasn't watching. But my grandmother has a video." He looked at her, and she handed him the phone. He watched silently, his expression unreadable, then exhaled deeply. "We'll take this as evidence. I can tell you right now, this isn't going to be treated as an accident." After he left, the room grew quiet again. The night pressed against the window, heavy and still. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. My parents hadn't come to see me. Not a single call, not even a message. The only people who cared whether I lived or died were Grandma and Aunt Barbara. And maybe that was all I needed to know about what family really meant. The next morning, I finally felt strong enough to sit up. Grandma helped me sip some water, her hands shaking slightly as she held the cup. "Do you think they'll arrest him?" I asked softly. She nodded. "They will. Detective Gray said he's already spoken to your mother and father. They tried to deny it, of course, said it must have been a prank gone wrong." My voice rose in disbelief. "A prank? They're calling that a prank?" "I know," she said sadly. "Some people will say anything to hide from the truth." A nurse came in with discharge papers later that afternoon, but I refused to sign them until I knew Brandon was in custody. When Detective Gray returned, he confirmed it. "He's being held for questioning," he said. "We're filing for an attempted manslaughter charge." We also took a sample of the food from the house. It tested positive for peanut protein. I nodded slowly, a mix of relief and sorrow washing through me. "Thank you," I whispered. "I just can't understand why." He gave me a sympathetic look. "Sometimes, jealousy runs deeper than anyone expects. And when money or pride gets involved, family can turn dangerous." His words cut deep because they were true. When he left, I stared out the window at the city skyline. The sun was setting again, painting the world in amber light. It looked beautiful, too beautiful for how broken I felt inside. Grandma reached for my hand, her voice gentle but firm. "You listen to me, Ava. You're stronger than they'll ever be. You survived because you were meant to." I leaned against her, exhausted, whispering, "I don't think I can face them again." "You won't have to," she said. "Not until you're ready. And when you are, you'll face them on your terms, not theirs." That night, as the hospital lights dimmed and the machines beeped softly around me, I realized something that chilled me to my core. My family had tried to silence me forever, but they had only succeeded in awakening me. They wanted me weak, dependent, and afraid. Instead, they had turned me into something else entirely. Someone unbreakable. I closed my eyes, still hearing Grandma's voice echo in my mind. "You have to protect yourself, because sometimes the people who should protect you won't." For the first time, I truly understood what she meant. When I woke up again the next morning, the sunlight spilling through the blinds looked softer, calmer. Like the world was trying to remind me I was still alive. My body felt weak, but my mind was sharper now, raw with anger and disbelief. Every breath through the oxygen mask burned, but it was a pain that made me feel real. I wasn't supposed to be here. If Grandma and Aunt Barbara hadn't found me in time, I'd have been another quiet tragedy in a family that would have probably told people I passed suddenly. The thought sent a shiver through me. I turned my head slowly toward the corner of the room, where Grandma Martha sat in the same chair as before. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were red, her hands clasped tightly around her rosary beads. When she noticed me stirring, she stood and came closer, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered. "How are you feeling?" My voice cracked as I replied, like I swallowed fire. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "You gave us quite a scare." I looked at her, then around the room. "Where's everyone else?" I asked. "Is Mom here? Dad?" For a second, I thought maybe she hadn't heard me. Then she let out a tired sigh. "They're not here, Ava. They left the hospital last night." I blinked. "Left? Why?" I almost died. "Because they don't want to face what happened," she said, her tone hardening. "They tried to convince the police it was an accident. They told Detective Gray that you must have eaten something without realizing." I let out a short, humorless laugh that scraped my throat raw. "An accident," I repeated bitterly. "They're really sticking to that?" "Yes," she said quietly. "But they won't be able to keep up that lie for long." A knock at the door interrupted us. Aunt Barbara stepped in, holding 2 coffees and a determined expression. "You're awake," she said, setting 1 cup on the bedside table. "Good. We have a lot to talk about." She greeted Grandma with a brief nod, then turned to me. "I'm so sorry, Ava. I wish I could say I was surprised, but I'm not." "You saw the video," I said. She nodded grimly. "I did. It's all over my mind. Marcus Gray already has it as evidence. I don't think your parents realize how serious this is." "They never do," I murmured. "Everything's always a joke to them." Barbara sat at the edge of my bed. "Detective Gray wants to meet with you later today, if you're feeling up to it. He's gathering statements." I nodded weakly. "I'll talk to him. I want them held accountable." Grandma reached for my hand. "Before you do that, there's something else you need to see." Her tone was hesitant, as if she wasn't sure if she should show me. "Another video?" I asked. "Not quite," she said softly. "A recording from last night." She opened her phone again, her hands trembling slightly. The video was grainy, captured from outside the hospital. Local reporters crowding the entrance, lights flashing, microphones raised. My parents stood in front of the cameras. My father's voice rang clear. "This is a misunderstanding. Our daughter has always been overly emotional. She must have eaten something she shouldn't have." My mother nodded beside him, crocodile tears glistening under the lights. "Ava's allergic to so many things," she said. "We would never hurt her. We love her." I felt something inside me break, not in the loud, dramatic way I'd expected, but quietly, like glass cracking under pressure. My hands curled into fists. "They're lying," I whispered. "They're standing there pretending to be victims while I'm hooked up to machines." Barbara's voice hardened. "That's why the truth has to come from you now." The door opened again, and Detective Marcus Gray stepped in, holding a notepad and a calm, professional expression. "Miss Collins," he greeted. "Good to see you awake. I understand this is a lot, but I want to make sure your statement is accurate." I nodded. "Go ahead." He asked gentle but direct questions. What I remembered eating, who was in the room, how I felt before the attack. I answered everything, even the smallest details. When I finished, he said quietly, "The lab results came back this morning. The salad dressing from your plate had high traces of peanut protein. None of the other dishes did." He paused, meeting my eyes. "Your brother's fingerprints were found on your plate." My chest tightened. "So it's confirmed," I whispered. "He really did it." Marcus nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am. He's been taken into custody for questioning. But your parents," he hesitated. "They're refusing to cooperate. They've already contacted an attorney." I clenched my fists again, shaking my head. "Of course they have." He gave me a sympathetic look. I just want you to know you're not alone in this. The evidence is strong. You did nothing wrong." After he left, the silence in the room felt heavy. Grandma reached for my hand again. "I warned you they might try to twist this," she said. "But they can't hide the truth forever." "I don't even know if I want justice," I said softly. "I just want to understand why. Why would he do that? Why would they defend him?" Grandma's voice cracked as she said, "Because they've spent their whole lives pretending he's perfect. If they admit what he did, they have to admit they failed as parents. And they can't face that." The rest of the day passed in a blur of nurses, paperwork, and more questions from investigators. By evening, I was cleared to leave the hospital, though the doctor insisted I stay with someone for a few days. Grandma helped me pack my small bag while Barbara handled the discharge forms. As we walked through the hospital corridor, I noticed people staring at me, some with sympathy, others with curiosity. It made me uneasy, but Grandma whispered, "Hold your head high. You survived. That's all that matters." When we got to the car, Barbara turned to me. "Do you want to see the house again? To get your things?" I shook my head. "No. That house tried to kill me." She nodded, understanding. Grandma placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You'll stay with me until you decide what's next." I looked out the window as the car started moving, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold. My heart ached, not just from what had happened, but from what it meant. There was no going back now. Whatever illusion of family I'd been holding on to had finally shattered. That night, lying in Grandma's guest room again, I stared at the familiar ceiling. Everything looked the same, yet I was different. Stronger, maybe. Colder, definitely. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the endless stream of messages and notifications. Somehow, word had gotten out. People I hadn't spoken to in years were sending messages of shock and sympathy. A few news outlets had already run the story, "Young Seattle professional hospitalized after family dinner gone wrong." They didn't know the half of it. As I set the phone down, Grandma came in quietly and sat beside me. "You should rest," she said softly. "Tomorrow will be a long day." I nodded, closing my eyes, but one thought kept circling in my mind, refusing to let me sleep. If the world was finally seeing what my family truly was, then maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to stop hiding too. They had tried to destroy me in silence. Now, I would let the truth speak louder than their lies. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that wasn't just from recovery. It was from realization. I had spent my whole life tiptoeing around my parents' cruelty, believing silence was the safest path. But silence nearly got me killed. As I sat at Grandma's kitchen table sipping weak coffee, the news played faintly on the TV. My family's faces filled the screen. My father's cold eyes, my mother's trembling hands, Brandon's smirk blurred behind pixelated text. The reporter's voice cut through the air. Sources confirm that police are investigating an alleged poisoning attempt involving a Seattle woman and her immediate family. The victim, Ava Collins, remains in recovery. My stomach turned when I saw them standing outside the courthouse the previous night. My mother was crying dramatically, her voice cracking for the cameras. "We would never harm our daughter," she insisted. "She's always had such a vivid imagination." My father's arm was around her shoulders, his face the picture of grief and dignity. "We just want her to get better," he said. The sight made my blood boil. They weren't just trying to erase what Brandon did, they were rewriting the story completely. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through messages I hadn't answered. Olivia Grant, a local journalist who had been covering human interest stories for years, had left a voicemail. Her calm, confident voice played through the speaker. "Ava, this is Olivia Grant from Channel 9. I'd love to give you the opportunity to share your side before rumors take over. You deserve to be heard." I stared at the phone for a long time. Grandma looked up from the stove. "Are you thinking about it?" she asked. I nodded slowly. They've spent years controlling the narrative. Maybe it's time I take it back. She smiled softly, pride flickering in her tired eyes. "Then do it. The truth doesn't need to hide." That afternoon, Olivia arrived at Grandma's house. She was professional but kind, dressed in a muted grey suit and carrying a small camera crew with her. Before they began, she pulled me aside. "I know this isn't easy," she said gently. "If at any point you need to stop, we will." I nodded. "No. I want to do this." When the cameras rolled, I told everything. How my parents ignored my allergy, how Brandon mocked me for it, how my scholarship was dismissed, and how I had built a life on my own only to have them try to destroy it out of greed and resentment. Olivia listened quietly, her eyes soft but focused. "Why do you think your brother did it?" she asked finally. I swallowed hard. Because they taught him he could. Because in my family, love was always conditional, and I stopped being convenient to love the moment I didn't need them anymore. The interview aired that same evening. Within hours, the internet exploded. #JusticeForAva began trending on every major platform. Thousands of strangers flooded the comments with outrage and sympathy. People shared their own stories of neglect, of family betrayal, of survival. It wasn't just my story anymore. It had become a mirror for others who had been silenced. My parents' facade began to crack under the pressure. The police station confirmed Brandon's confession after hours of questioning. He admitted to mixing a small amount of peanut dust into my food, claiming it was a prank that went wrong. But the evidence was clear. Detective Marcus Gray called to tell me they were moving forward with charges. "You did the right thing speaking out," he said. "It helped us secure witnesses and statements from the staff who were present that night." Still, my parents refused to accept it. 2 days later, they showed up at Grandma's house unannounced. I saw their car pull into the driveway and felt my pulse quicken. "Stay here," Grandma warned, but I shook my head. "No," I said. "It's time I face them." When I opened the door, my mother was already halfway up the porch steps. "Ava, please," she began, her voice trembling. "This has gone too far. The news, the police. Do you have any idea what this is doing to our family?" I stared at her, stunned by the hypocrisy. "Our family? You mean the one that tried to kill me?" My father stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Watch your mouth. You're making a fool of yourself." "No," I said quietly. "I'm exposing the truth." My mother's tone turned sharp. "We did everything for you. We raised you, we gave you everything we could." I laughed bitterly. "You gave me nothing but fear. You gave him everything." My father's jaw tightened. "He made a mistake, Ava. He didn't mean it." "A mistake is forgetting to lock a door," I snapped. "Not poisoning your sister." My mother started crying again, but there was something hollow about it, as if the tears were more for show than remorse. "If you loved this family, you'd drop this case," she pleaded. "You're tearing us apart." "No," I said. "You tore it apart the moment you let him hurt me." Grandma appeared behind me, her voice firm. "That's enough, Diane. Leave her alone. You've done enough damage." My father glared at her. "This isn't your business, Martha." "The hell it isn't," she shot back. "I was the only one who ever treated her like family. You just used her success when it suited you." They stood there in stunned silence, realizing maybe for the first time that they had lost control. When they finally left, my mother turned back at the door and said softly, "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I just closed the door. That night, Olivia called again. "Your interview has gone national," she said. "People are demanding accountability. Donations are flooding in to support allergy awareness and victim advocacy. You've started something powerful, Ava." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I just whispered, "Thank you." For the first time in my life, I felt heard, not as a daughter, not as a victim, but as a person. The next morning, Detective Gray confirmed that Brandon had been officially charged with attempted manslaughter and that my parents were being investigated for obstruction of justice. The news outlets updated their headlines, "Seattle woman's family faces charges after public exposure." Seeing those words felt surreal, like I was reading someone else's story. But it was mine. Every painful, ugly piece of it. Grandma hugged me that night, tears streaming down her face. "You did what I never could," she whispered. "You stood up to them." I rested my head against her shoulder, my voice barely audible. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it so I could finally breathe again. She smiled through her tears. And now you will. As I lay in bed later, the glow from my phone lit up the room. Thousands of messages from strangers filled my inbox. Some sharing their stories, others simply saying they were proud of me. I scrolled through them slowly, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known before. For the first time, my voice had power. The truth wasn't just mine anymore. It was out there, alive, unchangeable. My parents had tried to bury me with silence, but I had turned that silence into a storm they couldn't escape. And I wasn't finished yet. The weeks that followed were a blur of hearings, interviews, and sleepless nights. I attended every court session, sitting in the front row beside Grandma Martha, my hands cold and steady as steel. Brandon sat across the aisle, looking pale and restless in his suit, his once cocky grin nowhere to be found. My parents sat behind him, whispering to his lawyer, their eyes avoiding mine. The courtroom smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, the air thick with tension. The prosecution presented the evidence, the surveillance video showing Brandon mixing peanuts into my food, the lab reports confirming the peanut traces, and the testimonies from the paramedics who arrived just in time. Each piece of evidence felt like reopening a wound, but it was also validation. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that what they did was real. When it was my turn to testify, the entire room went silent. My voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger with every word. I told the court everything, from the years of favoritism and neglect to the dinner that nearly killed me. I watched my mother's face twist with disbelief, my father's jaw clench in silent fury. All I ever wanted was love, I said, my voice cracking. But what I got was silence. And when silence wasn't enough, they tried to make sure I'd never speak again. The judge's expression softened, the jury shifting uncomfortably in their seats. By the time I stepped down, I wasn't just testifying as a victim, I was reclaiming my voice. Brandon's lawyer tried to paint him as immature, claiming it was a prank that went wrong. But Detective Marcus Gray's testimony crushed that defense completely. He explained that Brandon had purchased crushed peanuts days before the dinner and searched online for how much peanut can cause an allergic reaction. It wasn't impulsive, it was premeditated. The courtroom gasped. My mother began crying loudly, but the sound was hollow. My father just stared straight ahead, his hands clenched into fists. When the verdict came, it was swift. Brandon was found guilty of attempted manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The judge called it a deliberate act of cruelty motivated by jealousy. My parents' faces went pale. My mother screamed his name as officers led him away in handcuffs. My father slumped into his chair, looking like the weight of the world had finally crushed him. I didn't smile, I didn't cry, I just sat there numb. Justice didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. In the weeks that followed, I didn't hear from my parents. But the news traveled quickly. My mother and father were charged with obstruction of justice for tampering with evidence and lying to investigators. They pleaded guilty to lesser charges, avoiding jail time but losing their credibility and standing in the community. For people who had built their lives on appearances, that was their true punishment. Then came the day that changed everything again. Grandma Martha called me into her lawyer's office one afternoon. I assumed it was about the house or some legal paperwork related to the case. But when I arrived, I noticed the serious expression on attorney Edward Harper's face. "Ava," he began, adjusting his glasses, "your grandmother has asked me to update you on some important matters." Martha smiled softly, though her eyes looked tired. "It's about my estate, sweetheart." I frowned. "Grandma, you don't need to," she raised her hand gently. "Let me finish. I've changed my will. Everything I own, my home, my savings, the trust fund, it's all in your name now." I froze. "What?" "Grandma, no, I can't." "Yes, you can," she said firmly. "You've earned it. And more importantly, you need it to build something good out of all this pain." Edward slid a folder across the desk. "She's also set up a foundation in your name," he explained. I blinked. "A foundation?" Grandma smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "The Martha Anderson Foundation. It's for young people who've faced family abuse or neglect, who need help getting scholarships, therapy, or a place to stay. I want you to run it. The words hit me so deeply that I couldn't speak. The same woman who once held me through nights of silent crying was now giving me the power to help others survive their pain. "Grandma, I don't know what to say," I whispered. "Say you'll do it," she said. "Say you'll turn our family's darkness into someone else's light." I took her hand and nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I will," I promised. The story of the foundation quickly spread through the media. Olivia Grant covered it in a follow-up interview, describing how the same woman who was nearly killed by her family was now helping others rebuild theirs. Donations poured in from across the country. People moved by the story, by the strength it took to forgive life, even if not the people who tried to destroy it. I used part of the inheritance to buy an old community center in Seattle, converting it into a support hub for youth with toxic family environments. I filled its walls with color, warmth, and purpose, everything I had once craved. My parents tried to contest Grandma's will, of course. They claimed she was influenced by me, that I had manipulated her. But when the court reviewed the documents, it was clear. Grandma had recorded a video statement with Edward Hopper weeks before her passing, saying, "Ava is the only one who ever cared, the only one who ever gave without taking. She is my true heir." That recording ended the dispute instantly. Watching my parents lose everything they once used to control others didn't make me happy, but it gave me peace. For the first time, they couldn't buy their way out of their own actions. Months later, I stood on the stage at the grand opening of the Martha Anderson Foundation. The building was small but beautiful. Modern glass walls, a soft mural of hands reaching for light painted across the entrance. Reporters filled the crowd, along with volunteers, students, and survivors. I took a deep breath and began my speech. "When I was a child," I said, my voice steady, "I thought family was defined by blood. I believed that if I worked hard enough, I'd earn their love. But what I've learned is that real family isn't who shares your DNA, it's who stands beside you when you have nothing left to give." I paused, looking at Grandma's framed portrait behind me. This foundation isn't just about survival. It's about reminding people like me that their story doesn't end with pain. It begins with choosing themselves. The applause that followed was thunderous, but all I could hear was Grandma's voice in my heart, whispering, "You did it, sweetheart." I smiled, feeling the warmth of the moment wrap around me. The scars of my past would always exist, but they no longer defined me. I had turned betrayal into purpose, silence into strength, and loneliness into a legacy that would outlive the cruelty that birthed it. As I looked out at the sea of faces, young, hopeful, brave, I finally understood what freedom felt like. Justice had been served. Inheritance had found its rightful owner. And love, at long last, had returned to me, not from those who shared my blood, but from the world I had rebuilt from it. The day of the foundation's opening ceremony was bright and calm, the kind of day that carried a quiet promise of healing. Seattle's skyline shimmered beyond the tall glass windows of the new Martha Anderson Foundation building. Inside, the scent of fresh paint and blooming lilies filled the air. The hall was simple but radiant. White walls lined with photographs of students, volunteers, and families who had already begun receiving support through the early pilot programs. Each story represented a life reclaimed, a chance rebuilt. As I walked through the corridors, running my fingers along the engraved plaque that bore Grandma's name, I felt a lump rise in my throat. This was her dream. The plaque read, "In memory of Martha Anderson, who believed that kindness, once given, can outlive pain." I could almost hear her voice echoing in my heart, "Make sure this love doesn't stop with you, Ava." And I hadn't let it. The foundation had started with just one vision, to help young people who were cast aside by their families, just like I once was. But it had grown into something far greater. Through generous donations and partnerships, we'd built scholarship funds, free counseling services, and mentorship programs. Volunteers from across the state had joined, including teachers, therapists, and even legal advocates for youth facing abuse or neglect. As the guests began arriving, I stepped onto the small stage in the main hall. Rows of chairs faced me, filled with students, community leaders, and reporters. Olivia Grant stood near the front, camera in hand, giving me a reassuring nod. Grandma's framed portrait rested on the table beside me, her smile forever warm, her eyes forever kind. I adjusted the microphone, feeling my pulse steady as silence fell over the crowd. Thank you all for being here, I began. This foundation was built from heartbreak, but it stands today for hope. I paused, letting my eyes travel over the faces in the crowd. There was a time, I continued, when I believed that love was something you had to earn. I spent years trying to prove myself to people who couldn't see me beyond their expectations. I thought if I worked hard enough, they'd finally call me worthy. But life had other plans. I learned that sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most. And yet, that doesn't mean you stop believing in love. It just means you start giving it where it's needed. A quiet murmur swept through the audience. Some people wiped their eyes. The Martha Anderson Foundation isn't just a tribute to my grandmother, I said. It's a promise, to every young person who's ever been told they don't matter, to every dreamer who's been told they can't succeed, to every survivor who's been told they're broken. You are not alone. You are not defined by what they did to you. You are defined by what you choose to build after it. The applause that followed was long and thunderous. Olivia smiled as the cameras flashed, but for me, it wasn't about the attention. It was about the peace that came with knowing that my grandmother's love had become something immortal. After the ceremony ended, I stood by the window overlooking the city. The sun dipped low, scattering gold across the bay. For the first time in years, the air felt light, almost new. Aunt Barbara came up beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. You made her proud, she said softly. I smiled. I hope so. I know so, she replied. We stood there in silence, watching the evening descend, the city lights flickering to life one by one like quiet blessings. Later that night, when the building emptied and the echoes of celebration faded, I wandered back to the main hall. The quiet felt sacred. I sat on the stage steps, my heels dangling, the soft hum of the city outside like a lullaby. I took out Grandma's old locket from my pocket, the one she had given me the day I left for college. Inside was a faded picture of the two of us from when I was little, and behind it, the words she'd written in tiny cursive, "Keep choosing light." That phrase had carried me through everything, the neglect, the betrayal, the loneliness. And now it carried me into a future I had built with my own hands. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what they had done. It was about refusing to let their cruelty define the rest of my life. My parents had chosen greed and denial, my brother had chosen envy. I had chosen truth. And that choice had saved me. When the foundation was finally quiet, I walked outside into the cool night. The city buzzed with life, but above it all, the stars glowed faintly through the clouds. I tilted my head up and whispered, "We did it, Grandma." A gentle breeze brushed my cheek, and in that moment, it felt like she was there, watching proud free. As I walked to my car, I passed a young girl standing near the entrance, holding a scholarship envelope with trembling hands. She looked no older than 16. When she noticed me, her eyes widened. "Are you Ava Collins?" she asked shyly. I smiled. "I am." She hesitated, then said, "Thank you for this. For giving people like me a chance." My throat tightened. "No," I said softly, "thank you for believing it's possible." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes, before walking away clutching the envelope like it was her lifeline. I watched her go, realizing that in some way, she was me all those years ago, standing at the edge of a world that had almost broken her, but not quite. When I finally drove home, the city lights blurred against the windshield. My heart felt lighter than it had in years. The past was behind me, but its lessons would always guide me. Family wasn't blood, it was choice. Love wasn't inherited, it was earned. And the legacy Grandma left me wasn't just her name or her estate. It was her strength, her compassion, and her unshakable belief that even the deepest wounds can become foundations for something beautiful. As I parked outside my apartment and looked up at the night sky, I whispered one final promise. This story doesn't end with pain, it begins with peace. And with that, I finally closed the door on everything that had tried to destroy me. I had turned betrayal into purpose, tragedy into triumph, and loss into legacy. The Martha Anderson Foundation wasn't just a monument to what I survived. It was proof that no matter how dark the night, love can always find a way to shine again. And that was my story, a story of pain, truth, and finding light after darkness. If my journey touched your heart even a little, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one. I'd love to know, where are you listening to my story from, and what time is it there right now? Tell me in the comments below. I'll be reading every word.